Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to my review of the Squale 1521 Lume dial, aka the shark that glows in the dark. Now here's something you don't hear all that often in a Squale review on YouTube. This video is sponsored by Squale. They sent me this one, I do not have to send it back. They got in touch with me earlier on this year and I asked specifically for the Lume dial version of the 1521. I have looked at a 1521 on the channel before, but it was on loan from Ashley, my friend in Melbourne. I didn't have that long to play around with it, so I was keen to revisit the case shape because the case shape is a bit of a classic. And I picked the Lume dial because I'm a self-confessed Lume pig. Now, Squale are an interesting company, not unlike a number of other brands that I have reviewed on the channel so far this year, including Olek and Weiss, Yema and Doxa, in that they had a prominent trading history selling watches in the 50s, 60s and the 70s, but then were killed off by the quartz crisis in the 80s and have been resurrected in the 2000s under new ownership. So you get a fantastic history of the brand, but don't expect a continuous line of trading because, as I said, it is under new ownership. Now, this watch has been in the house for a couple of months already. It featured in Lume Wars episode 5. You might be expecting a Lume dial watch to have taken that crown with ease, but it didn't win that day. I think the Lume dial here is fantastic. I think it's probably more useful in the daylight, ironically, and in low light conditions than it is after dark. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. So where do you get one and how much is it if you want one? Well, obviously this watch was sent to me by Squale themselves, so I'll leave a link to their website in the description of the video. You can have a look at this Lume dial 1521 and the rest of their range there. Cheapest price I could find after a bit of digging was Nomon Watches out of Singapore. They're selling this one for around 850 USD. Seems to be between 800 and 900 is the ballpark for one of these. Obviously, do your own research, do your own digging, find the best price you can for you, for your local market, your local currency. Now, $900, I have looked at plenty of dive watches on the channel for less than $900. A lot of them on bracelets. This one not on a bracelet today, it is on a tropic strap. I still think there's value in this one though. I'll get it the right way up, making sure the shark points skyward. I think really today you're not necessarily buying the name, you're buying the case shape, you're buying the design, and the design, as I said, is a bit of a classic. This pouch though is gorgeous. This is a proper leather, no PU leather here. Verapelle, made in Italy, a proper nice piece of dead cow. There's the watch, 2-year warranty and a little instruction manual in there also. Yeah, so definitely a bit of a classic case here today. Squale used to sell cases to other brands back in the 50s and 60s, most notably Blancpain, Doxa with some irony, and even Heuer just before they merged with Tag in the early 1980s. They also sold watches under their own label, but you will often find vintage watches with Blancpain at the top and then the Squale shark underneath. So there is a reason why this one is double branded, if you see what I mean. Really interesting case, this one. It's one of these watches that kind of vanishes on the wrist, very well proportioned. I mean, as I said, they've been making this one for a long, long time, so they ought to have got the design right by now, I guess. 41.5mm diameter on my calipers, though, as I said, it's kind of interesting. It tapers down, it's kind of 40 around the mid case, and even smaller than that, it tapers down into the 30s when you look at the case back, and you can see that very interesting narrowing lug profile there as well. 13mm thick, just under 13mm thick, 48 lug to lug, 20mm lug width, and on this supply tropic strap it weighs in at 106 grams. So high polished stainless steel case, stainless steel crown and stainless steel bezel as well. Quite an angular case. You can see here chamfered edges to those lugs, and the lugs really do pull in towards the case. So it's a 41.5 that ends up tapering down to about 10 at the end of the tropic strap. I'll show you on wrist later on. It wears very, very nicely. It is super comfortable as well. Now, recessed crown at the 4 o'clock there, that features the Von Buren family crest. They were the family that originally owned the company back in the 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s. Coin edge aluminium bezel, and it is a 120 click unidirectional rotating dive time, just as you would expect. Nice action to this. It does feel quite light, but it does have a nice kind of snicky note to it, and everything lines up just about nicely. More on that later. Now, it may not have a bracelet, you may be getting it on a rubber strap today, but at least it is a good one. It is the proper old school design from the 60s with all of those cross hatchings, and yet it is really soft and compliant. branded with the Squale name on the end there. Other side, two big chunky retainers. There's an argument if your wrist is large enough, you can delete one of those retainers. You can just pull it off over the buckle there. It would be less chunky on wrist. I'll show you on wrist later on, as I said. And a nice vintage style buckle, again in high polish and again with the crest on there. Just reminding you once more of this watch's proud history. A Sapphire Crystal, obviously flat and with a distinct pop of blue anti-reflective undercoating. You can see it here in my studio lights. It is also quite noticeable outside, as you'll see later on. Before I talk about the dial though, have a look at the chapter ring. So we have got a high polished chapter ring. Very interesting effect there. Gives the dial an appearance from certain angles anyway of just kind of floating. I haven't seen too many high polished chapter rings. There is on the surface quite a lot of bling around this watch in terms of that high polished case and the Squale logo etched onto the opposite side to the crown. Now, I'm not sure whether I got old stock here. I suspect I did. I've had a look at a couple of adverts for this watch featuring, one would hope, current pictures and current stock, and it does not have the Squale logo. I'm, again, in principle, not a massive fan of that, but in practice, you don't even notice it. It is fairly discreet and they haven't coloured it or anything. So a little bit of bling on the surface, but I think that dial just brings it all back down. Love the colour. It's almost like a kind of Bakelite yellow, again, vintage case shape. I think that colour tone really matches in with it. So printed dial, double branded with the Squale, the crest, and the Squale with the shark, and 50 atmos. This one has 50 atmospheres, 500 meters of water resistance. The word professional printed underneath the picture of the shark, and Swiss made because this is obviously manufactured in Switzerland. So in some ways a kind of classic dive watch layout with the triangle at 12, batons at 6 and 9, date framed at 3 o'clock and circular indexes everywhere else. It's the colour tones that set this one apart. So we have a pop of colour in the form of orange, triangle and 2 batons. But indexes, minute markers and the handset are in black today. High polished black handset. So rather than looming the hands, they have gone for a contrasting effect with the loom. Let's put the loom video in now and you can see how it works. Fresh batteries in my UV torch. Really outstanding bright glow initially. There it is, just turning to the kind of green that you often get with this style of slightly vintage toned loom. Looks really good for the first couple of minutes, but if I crank the speed up, this is how it's looking towards the end of the 20-minute test period. Again, this technique, this application of a loom dial relies on contrast and not looming the hands here like they have done on certain spinnakers and other loom dial watches that I have reviewed. Towards the end of the 20 minutes, the whole thing has faded though. It's still legible, but it's not outstanding. So in terms of after dark legibility, you may be better off with one of the non-loom dial versions. This watch really comes into its own though when you're transitioning into a dark room after being out in the sunshine. And I have to say, it is super legible just in ordinary daytime conditions. The black against that kind of yellow loom dial really, really works. Case back is screw down and high polish, perhaps nothing to write home about, but it is nicely done, that little etch center section with the usual spec sheet, 50 atmospheres professional and the Squale shark appearing once more. Now, Swiss made watch needs a Swiss made movement and this one contains an ETA 2824-2. Yeah, so just one watch in one position, as always I appreciate, but there's a decent set of numbers. You would be hoping for something. Hovering around the 0 + 3 seconds per day is very good. Healthy amplitude as well. A beat error is acceptable. So this is a 25 dual hacking, a hand winding auto, vibrating 28,800 times per hour. That leads to 8 ticks per second. You get that nice high beat sweep of the second hand. ETA quote roughly a 40-hour power reserve with this one. Just bear in mind that with a Swiss-made automatic, you are going to be getting Swiss servicing costs every 4 to 5 years, or as and when it needs a bit of a refresh. But I think this watch really comes into its own when you get it on wrist. I think the whole thing just begins to work together well as a package. You wouldn't necessarily expect it to with that off yellow dial, high polished case, the high polished chapter ring and that tropic strap, but it just works. Now, side profile, you see what I mean here, 41.5. Tapering down towards the wrist, then you've got those lugs tapering in towards the tropic strap, and then the tropic strap itself tapering all the way down almost to a point at the far end. So it goes from 41.5 to 20 elegantly, and then all the way down to about 10. I think the whole thing just works. Like I said, you could probably delete one of those two retainers if you were wearing this one long term to kind of take a bit of the bulk underneath. Even that buckle, which is a little unusual, I think it works together once you get this one on wrist as a whole. And legibility, talk about legibility. It is fantastic. That's the proper overhead shot, and those black hands, the hand shape is a carryover, the kind of sword hands with that paddle second hand, that's a carryover from the rest of the 1521 range, but in black against that yellow dial with the orange markers, really, really easy to read. Outside, once again, it's all about that blue anti-reflective undercoating on the Sapphire Crystal, and I hope you can see how that high polished chapter ring does give the illusion a little bit that the dial is floating in the case. Very, very interesting effect. I wonder why more brands don't use that. On wrist, great case profile. You can see just how much those lugs do point down. The whole thing really does hug the wrist very, very nicely. One of the nicest fitting watches that I've worn in a long time, to be honest. But it's not all sweetness and light. It never is. There will be moans, there will be niggles, there always are. I alluded to it right back in the intro of the video. For a Lume dial watch, the Lume is great, but it's not mind-blowing, it's not crazy mental, it's not kind of torch on your wrist style. My Lume obsession began because I wore a Lume dial watch for 5 years as a daily. It was a Tag Heuer F1 Grande Lume dial, and it was a torch on your wrist. It was just insane after dark. This one, not quite as crazy mental as the Tag was. I do love the yellow though, and it kind of compensates for the fact that it isn't amazing after dark by being really good to read the rest of the time. Now the bezel, nice clicky action, but there is a little bit of flex around there. Yeah, you can see what I mean there. Perhaps more than I would have expected to on a watch at this price. And the Tropic, as comfortable as it is, they could have finished it better at the ends. It's a little bit rough and ready at the two ends. Again, I'm nitpicking here. That's not necessarily something you're going to be examining every day. And at that tapered tip as well, just perhaps not quite as neat and tidy as I would have expected it to be for the money. And talking of money, $850, admittedly very nice Swiss-made diver, but only on a Tropic strap. Not exactly a spec monster. They don't actually do an integrated bracelet for this 1521 case. I don't think they ever have. They do a metal mesh, which is available. No one have them for $70 US in the same high polished finish to match the case. $850, I still don't think it is too bad. Once you go beyond the kind of 500 and you're into stuff that says Swiss made, it's got an ETA in the back and it's got a recognizable brand name. Compare this to the Doxa 200 sub that I looked at a couple of weeks ago on the rubber strap. That one is $950, so I don't think this one is overpriced. Overall then, this one pretty much does come down to that case shape. I'm delighted that I have been able to spend an extended period of time with the 1521 this time, rather than just the kind of unbox and initial impression that I got with Ashley's a few years ago. And the case shape has not been left wanting. It is super, super comfortable, kind of hugs the wrist, just about disappears. And I think for that reason alone, the 1521 should definitely be on your radar and on your potential shopping list. So there you have it, the 1521 Lume dial by Squale. I reckon amongst the best in breed in terms of what this company offers currently. Case shape is an absolute classic, and it's a super, super comfortable watch to wear. I think it pulls off that whole retro look without looking retro, if you see what I mean. Lume dial, I love it. Perhaps not the torch that my Tag Heuer was all those years ago, but really, really legible in pretty much all conditions, this one. ETA 2824, you can't go wrong, and that is a lovely Tropic strap. $850, I think, is pretty much bang on the money for a Swiss-made diver, with a decent history like Squale does have, and with that full Lume dial as an added bonus. Certainly competitive when you compare it to that Doxa 200. Thank you for watching. I will see you in a future video.